Hello everyone, welcome to episode 43 of Nolzur's Marvelous Tutorials with RealmSmith. Today we are painting the Stone Giant. You guys asked for it, we are doing it. I think this is the last of the Giants. I don't think there's any more that we haven't painted yet that they have already released. So very excited to have everyone here. Hello Hulk Reality. Good to see you guys, and thanks for making us your preferred entertainment experience of the apocalypse. Hope you all are staying safe and at home and painting lots of minis and doing all that you need to do to survive through this. So excited to have everyone here. A couple quick announcements. First off, want to thank our sponsors, of course, Dungeons & Dragons, for having us on their channel. We're also live on the RealmSmith channel. And if you subscribe or you follow, this little potion bottle here should go bling and it should light up. I hope that's working today. If it's not, I can run over maybe and try and figure that out while I'm going through some stuff. But hopefully it does. It'll blink once for a follow and a number of times blue for a subscription. And that's just to let you guys know that we're here. But you have to do that on the RealmSmith TV channel. If you're on the D&D channel, you can go back to that after and support them, of course. I want to thank WizKids, of course, for these incredible miniatures that they send us to paint for you folks. And, of course, Vallejo, our official paid sponsor, for all the incredible paints that they give us on a regular basis for us to showcase and use. They are the best paint out there, and I am very excited and thankful and feel blessed and honored to be able to use them in this fashion. This, like I said, is the WizKids Stone Giant. I don't remember what wave it's from, but it's been around for a while, and I'm very excited to paint her. She is awesome, and I'm super pumped to dig right in. Tomorrow night, Tides of Wildmount, episode 5. I can't believe we're almost halfway through this season already. That will be at 7 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, and that is our Wildmount campaign, straight from the pages of the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount as we play through one of the opening adventures for everyone there. Super excited. We're also want to give a little shout out to Sirenscape. Tonight we're using the Mountain Pass sound set. I actually can't hear it in the studio, so if it gets too loud or too distracting, let me know, but it's a fun sound set. You can check them out at Sirenscape.com. They are the official title sponsor of our Wildmount campaign. As well, on Tuesday, we have Behind the Screen at 8 p.m. Eastern, which is when I go behind the DM screen to tell you guys, give you an inside look as to what we do for the Tides of Wildmount campaign, where we have basically a Q&A session. I'll answer all your questions regarding what we kind of do and how we do it here at RealmSmith. And then beyond that as well, we also have the Players Table hosted by Joel Auger. That is on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And then, of course, you can catch these VOD on Twitch afterwards on the RealmSmith and the D&D channel, as well as on YouTube on the D&D and RealmSmith channel as well. Let's jump right in, folks, and I'm going to try and get this little thing working because I always forget to initiate it before we go live. Let's see here. 4 tools. Typically, as usual, we use the Stone Giant miniature by WizKids. That is a Dungeons & Dragons miniature, and as you can see, she is awesome and wonderful and stoic and all the rest. As well, we're going to use some Vallejo brushes tonight. I have a 0, a number 1, and a number 2 brush for the job at hand, as well as a dry brush. I also have a larger brush for some of the dry brushing that we might have to do tonight. I also have a larger brush for a lot of the base coating, including the skin, as I try and kill time to try and get this thing working. Because for some reason it's not, but that's okay. You know what? We'll have to go without it for tonight. But that's not a huge deal here. Just restarting it. Also, of course, we have some water for diluting your paints, as well as washing your brushes, paper towel, of course, for dry brushing and for washing things. And paint palette for storing your paint, and of course mixing the paint as well. We're going to be mixing quite a bit of paint tonight, so I'm excited about that. For Paintless, we have a wide range of grays that we'll be using. That's a somber gray, steel gray, and Stonewall Gray for highlights. Bone white for some of the fur on her shoulders, and then we're going to use a sepia wash to add some depth and shadow to that. As well, we have leather brown and heavy brown for a lot of the leather areas. A black wash to go over the skin when we darken it up. Black for the eyes, because they have these dark kind of black eyes, as do stone giants. Heavy blue-gray for the base. And plague brown and rust over a base of heavy brown for the club she has in her hand, because it's kind of like a stalactite kind of thing here she has here. It's really cool, and we're going to use some rust effects to kind of add that orangey kind of texture or feel that a stalactite in the wild has in a cavern. These stone giants do live underground, and you imagine she just kind of like broke one of these off the ceiling in order to make it into a club. Imagine getting smashed with a stalactite. That would not be cool. I think stalactites hang from the ceiling. Hang tight, stalactite, I think. You guys, I always get that wrong. You guys can tell me if that is the truth moving forward. Also, if you have questions, I will be in the chat. I'm watching the questions. Just write question in capital letters before your question, because I just basically scan for that to find when you guys ask a question. And then I try my best to answer them as we kind of chat together here. I got Warped Saint 1 asked already, do you use a wet palette? I do not. I'm actually looking for a wet palette now. I have some people who have shown some interest, so I will grab a wet palette soon to try that out, because I haven't really used one much. Vallejo paint stays wet in the palette a lot longer than some of the other paints in the market, so I've never really needed one before, but I am doing a lot more shading lately. And so, or sorry, wet blending, I should say, which we will do a little bit of it tonight. Tonight, it would be very easy to just dry brush her face, especially because it's kind of a stone texture, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try kind of a smooth, kind of granite kind of look. And then we're going to do some fun stippling sort of effect as well. Stalagmite come from the ground. Got it. Stalactite, I'm going to say hang tight. That's the way I'm going to remember it. I did get it right this time. Thank you, Pete. I appreciate it. A roof popsicle. Is that the technical term, Pete, from where you come from? I'd love to know. All right, here we go. Starting off, we're going to do the entire skin first, because we're going to spray kind of a texture on it after. I'll show you how to do that. But first, we're going to use somber gray. Somber gray is a darker, kind of bluish gray. I could have gone straight grays and even used like a heavy blue gray on it, but I've decided not to do that today. I've decided actually to forego kind of that approach and go a little darker. I didn't want to go as dark as heavy charcoal. So basically what I'm going to do is, got a bristle on here. Basically what I'm going to do is just going to go through the whole miniature and cover her with all of her skin areas, I should say. Don't worry about getting it over onto the other areas. We're just going to cover her completely in somber gray. And that is going to be our base tone for her skin. I wanted to start a little darker, work my way up to light, and in the kind of the artwork in the monster manual on D&D Beyond, it shows that her skin, their skin is kind of on the darker side of gray, and I kind of love that idea. It's interesting too, stone giants, from doing some of my research before painting, because I love to kind of get into the mind of the creature that I'm painting and kind of understand their surroundings. It helps me to kind of have fun and really enjoy this process. I found out that I've used them. I used them in Storm King's Thunder when I ran that for Sentinels of the Storm. But I found out a lot more about them, which maybe I had forgotten. It's been a while since I've run them. But they are a peaceful, neutral race. They will attack when threatened, and they are dangerous at a CR7. But they're actually quite peaceful and creative and artistic. It says that when they hurl rocks, it's a feat of athleticism, not just of rage and pure kind of might, I guess you could say. They actually, it's like almost like an art form in the way that they throw them. The way that they carve stone is really fun. Another cool little tidbit is that they view the outside world, they call it the world under the sky, like a dream world, and they believe, because they rarely come kind of into our world, except for the outliers, kind of the hunters, gatherers of the tribe. They don't believe that what they do in our world has any bearing on their world. almost like, nothing has any consequences. So they will often be reckless and do things that they don't think will affect anything because they believe it's almost like another parallel kind of dream-like world, which is very kind of interesting. So you can imagine they live really deep underground under the mountains. All right, let's get to some questions here. Do you usually start with skin over clothing? D. Nicole, I actually choose. So my rule of thumb when painting minis, and I've said this before many times, and many people will say this, is start from the inside out. So what I typically do is start with the details that are the deepest recesses and kind of details on a miniature. So as you can see, for this it's the skin, especially because of the way that I'm going to paint it and kind of highlight it and shade it. But typically, and this just happens to be the case for her, is that the deepest parts you can paint first because you don't want to paint, like I wouldn't want to paint the, this is a rough miniature because it's kind of like a flat mini almost in a sense. Like there's lots of separation between the parts. But for example, if I were to paint something that was higher on the detail, like a piece of clothing, and then try and get in and do the skin, I may get gray all over that clothing. So you want to go deepest first and work your way out is kind of where I start. So it's not necessarily skin over clothing. It really depends on the mini and what the kind of the deepest detail area is that I want to hit first. That's how I usually tackle them. Let's see. And I'm sure once I paint all this, as usual, I'm going to come by and go, oh yeah, totally missed that part. Because when the paint is wet, because it's glossy, the way that the light kind of refracts off it, I'm using words that I don't even know, scientific words that I don't even know if make sense. But as the light hits it, it tends to obscure some of those areas that you might miss. As well as the paint dries, it shrinks. And so then you also notice kind of areas you may have missed that way as well. So just give it a nice solid base coat, and then as it starts to dry, you can kind of come back around the miniature and make sure that we have a nice solid coat. And you can see even the somber gray, which isn't an extra opaque paint, is going on nice and solid. And that's what I want. I want a really good solid base coat as a base for what is coming next. We're going to give it a nice wash after with black wash and then work up that gray again. We're going to have to also come back under kind of her clothing there to do that leather kind of brown hide area, but we can do that no problem as we go here. Oh, wow. D. Nicole just gifted a ton of subs. Thank you so much. Our light isn't working today. I apologize for that, folks. But for some reason lately. Lord Ulrich, one question. Came in late. Is that heavy blue gray? No, this is somber gray. This is just a color with, it's one of my favorite gray colors. It's kind of a bluish, a dark bluish gray, which is a really wonderful color in the line. It's this deep kind of blue gray. It's not heavy blue gray, but it is definitely on the blue side, and I wanted that kind of dark kind of approach to it at first. Heavy blue gray was just a little too light, which is what I usually use for like stone base. But for today, I'm going to be using this instead. And I'm just going around the miniature, checking to see if I've missed any spots, any obvious spots. But that is the base coat on her skin. Looking good. And again, I'm not afraid to get gray on some of the adjoining areas because you don't want to have a line of primer in between those spots. It's just a bad look. So that helps to make sure, but you can see how awesome kind of that tone on her is. Love stone giants, they look so cool. Do you prefer dry brushing or hand layering? Noah's Minis asked that. Noah's Minis, I actually prefer, depends on the application. So in this case, I'm not going to be dry brushing because her skin is very, very smooth. And so I'm going to kind of for like a granite kind of approach, very smooth sort of look. So for that, I'm actually going to work up the highlights through kind of hand layering or kind of a wet blending sort of approach. Or it's not really wet blending, but because I'm not mixing wet paint into wet paint, but kind of a layered blending approach, which I'll explain as I go here. But for her, but yes, for like the fur, I'll do a dry brush on it. And maybe even for the leather, I'll also do a dry brush because there's lots of texture. I typically keep dry brushing for things with a lot of texture. Fur, kind of a rocky texture is good usually for that, but for her skin, I'm not going to do that. That is pretty much dry. Dry nice and quickly. I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes just to let it kind of settle in, and then I'm going to give it a black wash. It's going to darken it even more, and then we're going to bring the highlights up through that. I do not want to start on any other colors just yet because we are going to do a really cool technique a little later to make her skin have a look of stone, which I'm excited to kind of try here. That'll be a lot of fun. Okay, so we're just going to put her down just for a second, look and see if I've missed any questions. Corey C. Lund, I see a question here. I happen to catch it. Corey, if you have any questions in the future, just write question first so I can see what it is. Don't want to miss them. What would you recommend for removing paint from a pre-painted plastic miniature? I've heard simple green is what people use. I've never had to do it, but simple green, you can dip it and then it'll dissolve the paint is my understanding. Somebody in there can also say that. Oh, and then you did it again. Thank you, Corey, for then putting question on it after. That's awesome. The hype train is incoming. I keep seeing this hype train thing. I don't know what that means, but it sounds important. A question. You stream this more than one place. I hear you get questions, but I can't see those. Dungeon Tomb. Oh, yeah. So we're streaming currently on twitch.tv/RealmSmith and twitch.tv/D&D. Those are two channels we're currently streaming on. One is ours. One is, of course, Dungeons & Dragons, wonderful channel. And you can watch on both and enjoy that. And I can see that Jack already did that, so that's awesome. Level 3 hype train. No idea what that means. It sounds awesome. Thank you for the hype. I should probably know more. Going down here. Warped Saint says, maybe when this is all done, you can put a side-by-side of all the giants you've done so far. That's a great idea. That's a lot of fun. I will. Maybe I'll post a photo on our Instagram of all the giants with her completely done, because that would be the final of the bunch. Because there's lots. And if you check out our Instagram, most of the giants are in there. The hill giant, I think. I don't know if I took a picture of the hill giant when we did it a few weeks ago. Fire giant's up there, I think. Maybe not. Okay, I'll do it. I'll definitely do it. Kyburn says, I've been using a lot of somber gray lately and steel blue. Well, steel gray is definitely here. I think you mean steel gray. That is what we're going to be using for one of the highlights, which I'm excited about. Question from Gary Diamonds. Is this stone giant going to be involved in Wildmount? Good question, Gary. We'll see. I tend to like to paint, I've mentioned this before, minis that I will be using on kind of future episodes. It motivates me to keep painting and kind of gives me a personal kind of attachment to it. And there's a good possibility maybe that if they end up in the mountains or somewhere where a stone giant might be, that she just might appear. What do you think? All right, I think she's dry enough, and I can see, it's amazing that when I go back, I can already see that there are areas, little areas that I missed. But that's okay, because I'm not too worried about it, because once I've done the black wash, that will forgive me of a lot of those sort of small little thin areas. And now black wash, for those of you that don't know and are new to painting, black washes offer depth and shadow on a miniature. Basically, they're used to, I haven't said this in a while, but it's talent in a bottle. It's quite magical when this happens. So you can see, we have the face here. We're just going to paint that over, and you can see immediately how that wash goes into the recesses and adds shadow into all that detail. And the washes really start to make the miniature come to life and accentuate a lot of the detail in the recesses, as you can see, as it does here. Pretty cool. Once that dries, obviously it's going to dry matte, as washes do. they do not dry glossy as they appear now. And then once it's dry, we'll start to work up some of those other highlights. I'm doing an all over wash. Sometimes you just want to kind of focus on that's a little too thick. Just dilute that a little bit with some water. Sometimes you'll do like a spot wash in the recesses. A lot of people like to do that rather than an all over wash. For me, an all over wash makes sense because I'm going to be layering on all of the highlights. So I'm not too worried about it looking kind of mottled. It tends to kind of go spotty, a wash does, on the surface. So by layering afterwards, you kind of cover a lot of that up. And she's kind of made of stone, so it's okay that it kind of looks uneven. But you can see what that's doing there. And see, we're going to work out all of this stuff up here, but it's the cheekbone, for example, and where the nose touches the face that you've added now a shadow in there, and it's bringing out that wonderful, wonderful texture. These models are so beautiful, and what a joy to paint. And of course, as usually one person per kind of episode asks, the WizKids minis come pre-primed, which is really cool. So basically, I took her out of the box basically like the hour just before I started painting, which is super cool and awesome. So there it is. Okay, so the wash is on. I'm just going to let that dry, and that again is going to add, for example, delineation in the hands. And it's the deepest recesses that I'm most concerned about accentuating using this wash, because the rest is going to be layered. So we're just going to put that down for a sec. Question. Oh, that was an older question. Let's see. Jay, that hype train is because so many subs have been gifted. Oh, I love that. Thank you, Shadster, for clarifying. And thank you for those that gifted all those subs. Gary Diamond gifted some subs. Man, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. That really, really helps us do what we do. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but the reason we can do what we do is because of all the subs and the love that you guys give us. So we really appreciate that. Hype train, if completed, unlocks certain motes of that level. Oh, that's cool. Good to know. The Rolling Meeple says, have you painted a Baylor before? Will you? There is a Baylor that I got. I believe it was a Baylor. Maybe I'll paint that next week. I will see. But you can see, too, the washes don't work as good on things that are smooth. So you can see even her leg here. It'll do the job, and I knew kind of I would get this effect from it. I'm more concerned about the fingers and such. But you will get kind of this, like I said, mottled or muddled kind of a look. But even in the kind of collarbone area, the cheeks, that's what I'm most thankful for kind of the wash to do here. The old school way, because I don't even know if I have my trusty, oh, I do have my trusty fan here. Look at that. It's a little loud. It's gotten loud over time. But I think this will help to kind of... The washes always take a longer time to dry, so this is one method. The other method is just to wait. Go get a snack. Stretch your legs a little bit. But when we're on stream, we're trying to get her done. This is a good way to do it. So yeah, I have not painted a Baylor before, and Rolling Meeple is the one that won a dice spinner. Watching last episode, we'll probably give away another one tomorrow night, so keep an eye out for those Myth Roll dice spinner giveaways. They're pretty awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to put her down like this and do that while I answer some more questions. The Dungeon Tomb says, I'm new here, but I just backed a Kickstarter where I get 201 miniatures, so I need to learn some tips and tricks. Been many years since I painted any miniatures. Dungeon Tomb, that's great. If you head to our YouTube page, we have 42 episodes of painting minis. And even if they're not the exact minis that you have, you'll learn little techniques from each one that you can transfer. That's what I did, folks. To get to kind of where I am at skill level, I watched tons of tutorials and just kind of like learned by osmosis by watching stuff. So yeah, awesome. Glad to hear. Is any cool tools to get started I should get? Dungeon Tomb, a decent set of brushes, a decent palette. If you want a wet palette, it's fine, but it's a bit advanced. And of course, a water pot. And that's it, really. If your minis don't come primed, you're going to need primer. Either a brush-on primer or a spray-on primer. You can get Rattle Can. Vallejo has really great Rattle Can primer. Question from Corgi88. And I received a level 2 hype train emote. Awesome. This is great. Good evening, Jason. How are you? I'm the Ramirez guy, and you'll be glad to hear that I won't be pestering you any longer since I finally painted it using the one you showed us last week as a model. Thank you so much. You're so welcome, Corgi. You are now Corgic88 and not the Ramirez guy. But I do want to see that Ramirez, so please post it and tag us in it, or post it on our Discord. As I know, Shadster, our wonderful moderator, and Prometheus Bound will be posting them in the chat. So you'll get all those links, guys. Make sure that you check all that wonderful stuff out as you watch here. Do you need to wash the WizKids models with soap before painting? I do not, Noah. I just paint them right away. And if you do that, you might even take the primer off. So I would suggest not doing that because there is no release agent or anything. It's just primer on there. Sometimes the paint doesn't adhere to the primer as well, just because it's been in the package a long time or whatever. But it's minimal. It's a minimal issue compared to having a pre-painted mini and the time that it takes to have to go outside and prime it and all that stuff. Okay, so that is enough. I'm going to go ahead now back to somber gray, and I am going to bring back some of that gray outside of the recesses. Opening up a new number 2 brush here from Vallejo, and I'm going to bring back that somber gray, dilute it a little bit because I don't want it to be super thick now. I'm not doing a base coat, and I'm just going to go around and kind of hit all of the higher areas again to bring it back to kind of that point. For example, in the face, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the brows, but I'm going to keep the crease above the brow where the wash kind of darkened things open. You can see that we're starting to bring out those facial features like that. I'm going to hit the cheek like so, the bridge of the whole nose. So we're not doing this is kind of a mid-tone highlight at this point. It's not a edge highlight or anything like that. We're basically doing all the mid-tone stuff. I don't want to get inside the mouth, but I do want to get all of the chin and up the side of the face here. And basically what we're doing is we're just bringing back those mid-tones. And the somber gray looks kind of quite a bit lighter than the undersurface, but that is also because it's wet. It will darken as it dries, as most paint does. There. But you can see now how much smoother her face looks as I'm adding this somber gray back. I'm not adding it everywhere. I'm making sure that I'm not undoing all of that wonderful wash that we did. I'm just bringing it back into kind of the mid-level detail. Like so. And the nice thing is the wash kind of shows you where the deepest recesses are, where the shadow should be. That's the awesome part of these washes. Of course, the top of the head would be light, as the light for this mini, I'm focusing it as if it's coming from above. Back behind the head here, there would be some shadow, so I'm going to leave kind of the base of the skull dark. But you can see there, now we're getting some really cool depth there. Again, I'm going to go in here on the chest area. There's kind of a bit of a crease, kind of showing muscle here, so I just want to make sure that I leave that kind of open. Down here, the sternum area. I'm just doing blocks now. I'm doing blocks of texture, or blocks of paint, to kind of show, accentuate those shadows even more. Come down for the neck. Like a fold in the neck here. Like that. You can already see how the detail is coming out. And you can also see how that, again, that mottled kind of issue that we get from washes, and any wash from any company I've ever used does the same thing. That goes away because it's no longer kind of sitting on that area here. There we go. Okay, so that is the head and neck, chest area. Close that up a bit there. I'm also going to come in here on the side, pick out kind of those big muscle groups. That's what I'm doing, is I'm basically focusing on muscle groups. Having a slight understanding of anatomy sometimes helps. I was a comic book colorist in a previous life at a comic book studio here in Toronto, and learned a lot about that, just watching, coloring comic books and just watching artists and working with their work and reading a lot of comics. You pick up a lot of kind of where the muscles exist and what those, but with these miniatures, because of the wonderful detail, it kind of tells you the story on its own. And the washes kind of help to, again, accentuate those muscle groups. And you can see too that the paint has dried down quite a bit to allow for, so it doesn't look as stark a difference. But we're working out all these kind of muscle groups. That's great. There we go. Awesome. Let's see if there's any other questions here. If I missed any. Gary Dan says he loves everything wrong. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of the support that you guys give us on a regular basis. Question: how would or did you utilize this creature in this current campaign? Patron says, I have not yet. I used Stone Giants as part of my Sentinels of the Storm campaign, which you can find some of the episodes or a lot of the episodes on YouTube or on Facebook. And you can find out there how we use those. Yeah. Okay. Just gonna, again, what I'm doing is I'm just picking out the main kind of muscle groups. And sometimes I just make it up. If I can't kind of figure out how something's gonna go, I'll just do lines and figure out, and it all kind of makes sense. You just basically have to be happy with the final result that you get. You are the boss of your mini. There we go. The hand, I want to leave a little bit of that. Hit those knuckles like that. And you can see we've added some depth here in the wrist, in the bend, and then we're just going to tip the fingers all the way down for this, like that. And then, of course, as we build up those highlights, we'll get more and more kind of detail in there. But again, this is just kind of the mid-tone. This process does take longer. I would be done already if we were just dry brushing. But I just want to show you folks kind of this subtle highlighting process that we're using. Or that I like to use on really any kind of smooth surface, or more specifically, any smooth skin. And if you do thinner layers, you'll get more of a subtle approach. Mine aren't super thin, but if I were to work this up with multiple thin layers, then it will kind of be even more subtle of kind of a build. But for me, I've talked about this before, the value of how many times a stone giant will appear on my table is how much time I'm spending painting it here. And then just basically the main purpose of this show is to show everyone out there that painting isn't daunting, it's not difficult, and that with minimal effort and time, you can get a pretty good result. I'm not winning any awards with this mini, but it is, tabletop ready and better than putting a non-primed miniature, an unprimed miniature on the table. That's right, unpainted miniature, just primed, yeah. Okay, so arms and chest, head are done. This is a little too much here, so I'm just going to close that in a bit. I don't like how stark that was, so I'm just going to leave the crease there. Now again, with these muscle groups on legs, just picking out the main muscle groups. There's one here. I don't know what they're called. I just kind of know what they sort of look like. There. See? Just picking those out. Leaving that darker gray in the recesses. Of course, I'm going to hit the knee here. The knee typically has kind of two parts. Like that. And then the side of the leg, we're just going to kind of hit the whole shin with this somber gray coming down the front of it. Leaving the darker gray kind of closer to the top here. Leave a couple lines in the foot. And then I am going to leave some shadow under the calf area. Hit the ankle, come back there, and you can see there, like that. And when you first put it on, it's going to look fairly stark, but you don't have to worry about it because, again, this paint will darken as it dries. So I'm not too worried about it. Cross the toes. And there is nothing wrong, folks, if you want to just dry brush this mini. Again, it's a stone giant, and it'll give kind of a stone texture if you do that. So don't be afraid to, if you want it to be quicker, to do that. Again, I just like to show kind of different approaches to doing things. And her skin is very, very smooth. So I wanted to kind of accentuate that. I'm also leaving that darker gray in the recesses as it connects to kind of like her clothing, just to give some delineation in those parts and show kind of shadow there. Like that. She's got a crazy kind of divot in her, obviously very athletic calf. So we're just going to leave that there. Kind of a bit of a ripple. There's a line that comes up from her ankle. And then a line down the back of the leg here. As you watch, a lot of you will kind of develop your own sort of approach. And that's kind of the idea, is I'd love to spark some inspiration, and then and then pick and choose kind of the things that you like or don't like about my techniques, and then hopefully bring it to your own miniatures and kind of learn your own sort of way. Definitely don't smack the camera when you're doing a live stream. It's not professional. I'm going to leave the underside just that dark, and there we go. That is the kind of the mid-tones. And again, up close, obviously it looks really delineated. Those lines are thing. But if you bring it back, again, these should look good from like a foot to 2 feet away. All right. Any other questions here? Question before your question. So Jason, oh no, DC Lisser. Thank you, DC Lisser, one of the moderators, just put question before question. Let's see. Question: have you painted minis created on a PLA 3D printer? Any advice? I have, actually. Careful, because resins do shatter. So I've been painting minis like prototypes from WizKids, and I'll drop it and it'll psh, because resin that happens. And so just be careful while handling them. Make sure that you clean them before. That means like all the supports and all the kind of little nubs that it leaves, because those do show up when you're done, especially when you paint. And don't be afraid once you've primed your 3D painted minis, that you then clean them up a bit more, because the prime really brings out some of those imperfections that you may want to clean up. Those are kind of my little tips for painting 3D printed miniatures. Don't think I have. If I miss any questions and I don't answer a question, just ask it a little later down the road here. The Dungeon Tomb says, do you use magnifying glass when you paint all small details? I do not. I use my natural eye, because from my perspective, if I need a magnifying glass to paint a detail, it's a detail that isn't even going to be seen anyways by the naked eye at the table. So for me, unless I had bad eyesight or something like that, I don't see the need to do that. I'm going to use steel gray, folks. This is when we start to mix a little bit. I'm going to take steel gray. It's a bluish gray. Again, I wanted to give her a bit of a bluish kind of gray look, and I'm going to take 50% somber gray and 50% steel gray, and I'm going to mix that together to get somewhere in the middle, dilute it with some water, and now we're going to do the kind of next level of highlights with that kind of mix. And I'm trying to go for a more subtle kind of look. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to take kind of, again, imagining the lights coming from above, we're going to do major muscle groups, but smaller areas. So now we're starting to, like for here, I would only do just at the top there. And it's smaller area within the area that we just highlighted. And for this, I'm probably going to do more kind of line work rather than big areas, depending on where they are. So on her neck, I've created another little divot using the paint. On her face is a perfect example of where to do this. So I'm going to do it on the bridge. I'm going to hit her nostril, but I'm going to leave that gray in that recess like that. I'm just going to hit her lips, hit her chin here like that. And then I'm going to hit just the edge of her chin, but leave the dark kind of area above it. Come down her chin on this side, and this is just the edge of her chin where the light would hit. The top of her cheek, kind of like that. Top of the cheek here, coming down kind of to the face, to the mouth area, like that. Her brow, but closer to the middle. Not so much further out to the side. Edge of the ear there, just to give it a bit more. Okay. And then I'm going to start on her head, kind of the bridge. I'm going to paint her entire top of her head because of the kind of the light and the way it hit. I go down that way, and then I'm just going to work it down to a point where I'm kind of happy with it. There's a bit of a kind of divot on the side. I'm going to leave that the way it is. I'm going to hit the back of her head, but that's probably as far as I'm going to go there. And just leave that darker color kind of moving down the head there. And that's what I'm going to continue to do around the entirety of the stone giant. Just kind of coming down smaller areas within the areas that we've already painted, staying out of the recesses, and then just adding that kind of second level of highlight. For her arms, this is when I start to separate some of those ripples in her arms like that. You can see what I did there. And that's going to give kind of that muscle tone. Then I'm going to come down here again, same thing. Oh, went a little too far over there. That was a bit of a boo-boo, but that's okay. Not too bad. But again, just going to focus on the very center of these muscle groups. Like that. Went over a little too much, but that's okay. There's kind of a muscle that kind of wraps around this way. But this is when I'm delineating them almost like the muscle strands. One down the center like this. Come around like this. And you can also see, in order to get kind of like a steady, straight line, what I'm doing is I am focusing, I'm bracing my painting hand that's holding the brush onto my other hand or onto the miniature to make sure that I have kind of a stable base to paint from. Here I'm going to actually start to delineate the different knuckles, the side of her hand, like that. And this is becoming a bit of a clinic kind of on highlighting, but it's going to take the most time of what we're doing on her here. Let's do her other arm, just while we're doing arms. Again, smaller areas within these, focusing kind of the middle of her bicep, like that. I'm going to put a highlight down here. You can see too that I'm still using my number 2 brush. It's a big brush for this, but I can still get a really good point on it, even at this size. I try to use a large brush until I absolutely can't anymore. Until it gets to the point where it's just not possible. Then I'll switch. Because I find if I move to a smaller brush too soon, then then it takes me way long to paint a miniature. For these, I'm going to just in the center of it, because it's kind of in a shadowed area, and then I'm not even really going to do the bottom of her arm here. I'm just going to do her bicep, leave the rest dark. Again, light is coming from above. Her leg, same thing. Kind of accentuate the end of the muscle group. Over here, same thing, just kind of on the top of this muscle group. This is where I want to focus. And just the edge of this one, and I'm going to leave the rest of it kind of in shadow under the leg. Definitely going to hit the knee, because that'll be the most kind of light, because it's a point. And then hit the shin all the way down here. And again, this is where you start to accentuate some of the different muscle groups and how they... How many times am I going to say muscle group in this tutorial is the question. There. And a lot of this I'm just making up when it comes to the muscles. Just what I think looks cool, and using the miniature, the actual model itself to educate where these highlights should go. Like that. I'm probably missing a ton of questions because I'm kind of focused. Again, they're done. Question. Sound effects in the background are a little loud at times. Hard to hear you over them. Thank you, Corey. I can't hear it in the studio now, so I will turn them down just a touch. There we go. So we can upload pics for minis to the Discord, of course. Ket Matari, there is a painting thread that you can upload them there, and we check them and take a look at all of your work. So you can absolutely upload to the Discord on the painting channel. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. There we go. Cool. Okay, and then final leg for this kind of second midtone or first highlight maybe. See, I just made up where that divot should be. I don't know. But hopefully it looks cool in the end. That's the beauty of painting a miniature rather than kind of just like a regular painting. You don't actually have to make up where these highlights go. The Mini tells you that story. It lets you know where exactly to put those lines. So you don't have to worry about kind of knowing or understanding anatomy. The anatomy is right there. You know, basically what you really have to know and kind of understand better is how light would play off that surface. Basically, you know, all of these areas are either a cylinder or a sphere. And so how, you know, I have to decide, is this a cylinder or is it a sphere? Do I need a round kind of highlight or do I need kind of an elongated line? That's what I'm deciding as I'm going around this miniature. Hit the camera again, that's great. There. Just like that. There we go. All right. There. So that is the kind of the second highlight done. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go with the same brush, believe it or not, we're going to do a oh, I have a question here from Apulo Felgar. How would you correct big boo-boos? Would you paint over with previous layers, color, or remove paint? Wouldn't remove paint, start again. I just paint over with previous layers. That's usually enough to do and to get the effect that you need. I very, very rarely, if ever, remove paint. Everything can be painted over. If you get a boo-boo and it's still fresh, quickly grab a brush that is clean with a little bit of water, and you can usually almost erase it. So I'm going to go straight steel gray now, and this is just going to hit all of kind of the highest kind of detail areas that would have the kind of the lightest area. Top of the head, and there's some lines here in the head that would get it, but the crown in and around here, there we go. Basically at this point I'm just getting kind of the highest detail areas, some paint with that straight steel gray. And again, you're making, each time you make one of these highlights, smaller and smaller area. Still using the number 2, even though at this point I could probably move to a number 1, although I have a 0 as my next smallest, so I'm just going to wait on that. But continuing to accentuate these muscles. And at this point, not hitting all of them, just most of them. Kind of the bigger areas. And as you kind of move along it, you're going to start kind of eliminating muscle groups. because then they'll be too small to add a highlight. That muscle group does not get another highlight. Just hitting the knuckles at that point, like that. Looks a lot bluer on camera than it does in my hand, actually. So she does not look like a frost giant in my hand. She kind of does on camera a little bit. But that steel gray is actually, it's got a lot of blue in it, and that's why. So I'm going to hit that. I'm going to hit her knee, of course. Just the end of her quad. Where, again, most of the light would hit. The back of her calf. Ankle. Heel. Like that. And her toes. Like I said, this is a more time-consuming process, but people have been asking me about this kind of approach, and I wanted to make sure that I cover it at some point. I did the same thing with the frost giant. People chatting in the Discord, very cool. That's what all those buzzes are. Along there, top of the bicep, mid of the bicep too. Okay. There. I'm pretty happy with the way that that's looking. I don't know if I want to do too much more from a highlight perspective. I might now, at this point, I'm going to shift over to Stonewall Gray. Now this is quite a different color, but this will bring some of that earthy back. I'm going to mix 50-50 Stonewall and Steel, and that we're going to use as kind of maybe a final highlight. I'm not sure. Really depends on how it goes on, but I'm mixing some Steel Gray into this to get a lighter kind of gray blue. I am going to switch now to my 0, because this will be smaller areas. We'll see how it comes on. So basically I'm just going to hit, that's a bit too bright, a bit too light, not subtle enough. So I'm just going to go back, mix in some of that blue-gray, come back in, or steel gray, I should say. At this point I'm just hitting the highest areas. This is the chin, the cheeks, bridge of the nose, bottom lip, top of the head, and kind of the crown that comes down, and then around the side as well, like that. I'm just working down some of these highlights now. There, the back, around the back of the crown there too. There. Now I'm just going to do kind of like a little, again, this would be a, this will get a highlight, like her the top of her chest area gets a highlight like a sphere. I'm just going to hit the edge of her collarbone, like that. There'll be a line just down her neck there and here as well. Top of her ear would get some. I think the face is looking, it's got enough. I think it's got enough highlights for me. Don't want to go any brighter than that. On the back of her neck, I'm going to just do a line down here like that and like that. Just 2 lines, kind of giving that look. Make sure I'm still hitting questions here. Question: I'm DMing my first game soon. Noah Nosmini says, any tips on how to handle it? Great question. And I get this question often. My biggest tip to any DM just starting out, and I've talked about this a couple times in the last couple weeks, and that is your players can only follow the leads you give them. So Don't worry, even if you're doing a pre-published campaign, or a published campaign where you're following something that's already been kind of written, just don't overwhelm yourself. Don't worry about setting up a whole world. Just provide what you need for your players and allow that to build depending on the decisions that they make moving forward. Don't overwhelm yourself by feeling like you have to have everything figured out, because you don't. Lord knows I don't going into every session. So just prepare what you need to prepare. And again, remember that they can only follow the leads you give them. And that will kind of educate your decisions on what you prepare and what you give them as you kind of move forward through the world with them. That's my biggest. Because, I mean, if I were to really prepare as much as I wanted to, I'd be preparing all week for each session. But I don't have that time, and I don't think a lot of people have that time. So, again, just prepare what you need. And then be prepared also that, you know, it's all going to go to heck. That the chances are, there's a good chance that they're not going to do what you want them to do. So whatever you feel you need to kind of be able to improvise as well, be prepared to improvise. It's really hard to kind of judge what your players will want to do and kind of how they'll walk through your world and what that will mean. So don't be afraid to improvise. Don't be afraid to go off book. I mean, the other big thing for me is I am not an old school DM. I am of the new school of thought, which is, you know, my job as a DM is to create an incredible experience and fun for my players. I'm not here to kill my players. That is kind of a bit of an old school kind of mentality when it comes to D&D. You can see I use my finger there actually to wipe off a bit of that because I thought it was a bit much. But yeah, I am not here to kill my players. I'm here to help them have fun. And if they have fun, I have fun. And I'm facilitating fun for them. And in turn, I find that fun. When they have an amazing moment in game, there's nothing that brings me more joy than when they feel like heroes. And so that's kind of my approach to DMing. And something I would suggest for new DMs. Okay, so that is probably as high a highlight as we're going to go on this because we have an hour left to do the rest of the miniature, but that was a lot. So she is quite, like I said, she looks quite blue, but once we start to add some of those other colors, I think that will come down a bit. But I don't mind it either. I kind of like the deep kind of gray look that she has. I may give more highlights based on, sometimes I'll wait. So sometimes I'll stop here and then I'll wait until I add all the other colors because right now she's looking pretty dark compared to the primer. As soon as you fill this in brown, this is going to pop and be brighter. So I don't want to go too far. The one thing I am going to do, which I wanted to do before I painted the rest, is I'm going to take kind of one of my beat up dry brushes, and I am going to take somber gray, a little bit of fresh somber gray here, because I want it to be wet. And this is a bit messy, so I'm going to add some water to it, dilute it a bit, and I'm going to, now it might be hard to see this, but I'm going to do it on top of a paper towel, but I am going to flick, using my brush, flick some of this somber gray back onto my miniature. What that's going to do is it's going to give her little dots on her skin to make it almost look like kind of stone texture on here. You know, this could be scary because it feels like you're ruining all the wonderful work that you've done. But for me, it's going to almost add almost like a pore texture. And it's very subtle, but I think that it really brings out or you know, just makes it more interesting for me. But there it is. And just adding some of that. It's really subtle, but it adds a bit of realism to the kind of the rock texture you can see on the leg there. Very cool. I could even go in and add some lighter, which actually I might do. Why not? I'm going to go in now into some Stonewall Gray, which is really light and bright. Don't know how this is going to go, so I'm going to try it somewhere I'm not too worried about. There. That's cool. And on some of the higher areas, so some of the areas that would get highlights, I'm going to stipple it or spray it, I guess, onto some of those areas, like the top of the head. And that'll give the head some texture. And this is my way, without dry brushing, to give her a stone look. It's kind of my technique to make it look a bit more like she's made of stone. Oh, too much. See what I did there? Ah! Just get the thing, wipe it off. There it goes. Again, too much. Yeah, it's too wet. If the paint gets too wet, then it transfers way too much on there. There we go. Like that. Okay. We are going to wash our brushes, make sure they're nice and washed, make sure there's no paint in the ferrule, which is the metal part, because then they'll really gunk up. And we're going to go ahead and start to paint the rest of the miniature here. Yeah, she really turned out nice, I think. I like it. I like it. Okay. Where are we going to start? Let's start with leather brown. We're going to paint her entire kind of dress that she's got on here. Leather brown. Going to use my number 2, of course, to cover as much ground as possible. And there's kind of multiple layers to this, so I want to differentiate them. Let's see. There's a piece that comes down here. I think I'm going to make that like a heavy brown. It looks like there's multiple kind of layers of different leathers. And so I want to use different colors to accentuate those different layers. Now, we want to be super careful in this case. Sometimes we base coat an entire miniature. Now, we want to take this leather brown. We want to be careful, and we do not want to get it on our skin, because that would be very difficult at this point to fix, to go back and kind of fix that. So let's not do that. So, you know, I'm being kind of rough around here, but as soon as I kind of come in to somewhere that touches skin or is close to skin, I'm going to be much more careful in here. I may still finish her by 7. I thought all of that skin detail I was adding was going to really shorten my time, but I think we might still be okay. Again, getting nice and close, but you don't want to go onto the skin area. Diluting my paint just slightly, as I always do. Let me take a look here and see what we're doing for questions here. Question: Hey Jason, this is Warped Saint 1. Can you turn down the fire effect on Sirenscape? It's a bit loud and it cuts you out every once in a while. There's a fire effect? I thought there, I can turn it down some more. And I didn't think there was, I think there's like falling pebbles, tumbling pebbles. So we're going to bring that down. Dire bears, we'll bring that down a little bit. I think that's it. I think it's the falling pebbles that you guys are hearing. That is really loud. How do you paint the eyes on a certain mini? I sometimes may have to do several times. Trobe says, yeah, so I do sometimes go in, come out, go in, come out. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, coming in from the side. You'll see I'll do these eyes, and you'll kind of get an idea of how that works. Got any advice on painting over pre-existing pre-painted mini paint? I'm trying to make a Bahamut more the platinum dragon and less the blue one. Yeah, so great question. I would just, if you're going to paint the whole thing, I'd say just prime it. So just spray primer on it, like a Vallejo gray or black primer, and then just paint over it like you would a non-painted mini. That would be my suggestion, because matching colors is going to be difficult unless you want to get in kind of try and color match, which again can be hard. So if you want to paint over, just prime it again, I would say, and start from scratch as if it was a non-painted miniature. That's what I would suggest. If you want to strip it, you can. If you feel like the paint that exists on it is kind of clogging the detail, then maybe you want to use simple green on it and strip it, but I don't know if that's necessary. There we go. Just going leather brown crazy on this thing. Just trying to cover it all up. Like so. You can see already it's kind of changing the look already of that gray. I imagine that Weeping Jay says, I imagine that tomorrow I receive the miniature of my character created on Hero Forge. I have never painted a figurine. I have no equipment. Is there a place where I can find the list of what I would need? A theoretical beginner's kit. Weeping Jay, like I said, if you don't have any paint or anything, you can get Vallejo paint from your local. Check your local game store first, because a lot of local game stores, of course, are struggling during this time. So we really need to support them to make sure that they're there when this is all over. So that's a big thing. See if they have paint that they can send you. They may have Vallejo that they are selling, and then they can ship to you. A lot of stores are doing that. If your local store isn't working, or you can't find a local store that carries paint in your area that was willing to ship to you, then I believe there's a lot of Vallejo on Amazon. Check there. And of course, you'll need brushes, a water pot, and a palette. But if you watch the video from the beginning, this video or any of our tutorials, I have a tools of the trade list, which will tell you kind of what you need to start painting minis. Just the basics. And then at that point, it really depends on what color paints you want. So then at that point, you just got to decide what colors you want to use. But our miniatures our tutorials will give you kind of ideas of different color types and schemes, and then what colors you would use to kind of highlight those areas. So you can kind of get like if you find that you want to use red, watch our red dragon tutorial, for example, and it'll show you how to highlight red. That would be my suggestion as to what to do there. We're also, Vallejo is releasing a set of paints partnered with WizKids, which we're very, very, very excited to be involved in, and I curated and am creating all the tutorials for those. So those will be in the market sometime in the summer is the plan. I don't know if this whole thing has slowed that down at all, but that is the plan moving forward. And they will have actual kits for painting the unpainted minis from the WizKids line. So I've curated specific technique sets. If you go back in some of our episodes, I actually showed off those kits. So you can check those out. You can find out there's 2 40 paint kits, a starter and an intermediate kit that you can get, that you will be able to get, and then also technique sets for specific techniques. So for painting armor and weapons and fur and all that kind of stuff. So you can check that out. This is always fun, trying to get, I call it the undercarriage of a miniature, kind of moving the miniature all around, trying to find a way to paint under there is always fun. But I did it. And again, if there's a corner that's really difficult to get your brush in on a mini, and you're like, oh, I can't get it there, then chances are nobody's going to see it anyways. So I wouldn't stress out about that at all. or too much. I won't say it at all because I stress about it too, but in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really matter. Okay. I'm close to done this. Her clothing here, just base coating it all as we go. Now I'm going to take the easy approach on her clothing. I wanted to really give her skin kind of a solid look, but I'm not so worried about her clothing. I am being careful around her skin, though. Again, making sure I don't wreck all of that work I just did to get her skin to where I wanted it to be. Sorry, I'm off camera here. And just remember to leave the dark areas in the recesses, especially between the different areas. Like right here, that darkest area between the clothing and her skin is really going to give delineation there and depth to that miniature. So I want to make sure I keep that nice, solid bluish gray color in the recess there. Going to get into turbo mode soon here, folks, to finish her up. And you can see that I'm dipping my brush in my water before I get paint so that I can dilute it a little bit. So I can mix it a touch in my palette so that it just flows nicely and it's not kind of sticking. There we go, in the detail. And then into here, and that is, I think, it for the upper body part of all of the clothing. There we go. It's a nice solid base coat. I'm going to let that dry, and then once that's dry, I'm going to give it a wash with sepia wash. Again, my favorite wash, as you guys know. But while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and grab Heavy Brown, which is an extra opaque paint. The extra opaque paints go on in one coat. They're designed, I mean, that leather brown basically went on in one coat too, so the Vallejo paint really covers well. Do you use Zenithal highlight? Zenithal highlighting. I don't. That is, so for those of you that don't know, it's when you airbrush or use a spray can to kind of put a white paint here and then paint over it. I don't do that. I'm old school in the way that I paint. I know it works really great for some people, but that's not something that I have a lot of. That's not something I have a lot of experience with or really want to get into at this point. I might try it if I start to airbrush more, but as it stands right now, I only airbrush in certain circumstances when I absolutely feel that I need to for a given kind of technique. So right now, not too worried about that. I'm just using Heavy Brown to base coat all of the fur on her shoulders here. Just making sure to kind of jab it into all the recesses. It's very close to the leather brown color, but once we add highlights and stuff, it'll be quite separate. Again, making sure not to touch that skin. Like that. How do you load the brush properly when dry brushing to not leave too much paint on the Mini? Too often I get too much paint on the Mini despite brushing it repeatedly on a paper towel first. So the rule of thumb for dry brushing, and you kind of, as you get more experience, will know how much paint you want on that brush to get the effect that you want. But for me, basically until paint starts to and basically until it appears that it's not even coming off the brush. So we are wiping a lot of it off. You can always add paint. It's hard to take away. So when dry brushing, the more subtle it is, the better it's going to look in the end. And so you're basically wiping paint off that brush on your paper towel until it appears like it's not even almost transferring or hardly transferring at all. So you're probably just not wiping enough paint off that brush in the first place. And you'll get an idea of how much you should be wiping as you kind of get experience doing it. How do you paint the eyes? I got that already. Cool. Let's see. Any more questions here? I'm not seeing any. Oh yeah, Jay, how do you keep your brush tips sharp? Any advice? Cleaning, yes. So for me, whenever I'm pulling paint off a palette, you'll notice I rotate my hand like this so that it brings the brush tip to a point, so that I have a nice tight point when I'm actually painting. In the end, though, after you've washed your brush, I typically wash it and then bring the tip to a point between my fingers, so that when it dries, it'll be at a point still. That's incredibly important. Also, I'm not as good at this as I should be, admittedly, but you can get like I think it's called Master's brush soap, and you can basically clean your brushes. It's important to not get paint into the ferrule when you're loading your brush. If you get paint into kind of the area where the bristles meet the metal, it will gunk it up and it'll change the way that your brush acts or functions on your miniature. And so you want to be really careful of that. And you want to clean it out if it happens. So those are some ways that you can keep a good tip on your brush. Just trying to get, do you think this rock monster is calcium silica deficient? Good question, Patron. Do you prefer Vallejo Game Color or Vallejo Model Color? Is one better than the other? Noah's Mini says. Game Color is what I use on all the shows. I have used Model Color, but I don't a lot. The reason is Model Color is meant for and was designed for historical miniature gaming, tabletop gaming. So World War II minis, things like that. The color range is much more real world and less fantastical than the Game Color range. Game Color range is kind of their fantasy line, which is kind of designed to be more, provide some of those more fantastical colors for painting things like D&D minis or wargaming minis or anything like that. So I would absolutely suggest, if you're interested in Vallejo, to go for the Game Color line if you're doing tabletop RPG like D&D minis like these. Those are the differences. Okay, so that is, I'm going to wait for that to dry. I'm also going to base coat the club. I think I'm going to use my big brush for that because we are running short on time, and I am going to be using my heavy brown still, again, same as I used for the fur. Being careful here not to get it on the skin. I'm going to paint right down as far as I can with this brush. It's a huge brush. It just gets the job done quicker. It's actually a dry brush that I still use for a lot of different things. But that is how I'm going to, there, look at that. In no time did I finish the top of that. And again, I'm making this look like a stalactite that this stone giant just literally pulled off the roof of her cave that she lives in, and now is going to smash somebody over the head with it if they come too close to her clan or her tribe. So that is kind of the the look and the feeling I'm going for here. Some more heavy brown. I'm running out. And again, I have a rust effect that I've pulled for this mini that I'm going to use on this stalactite club to make it, kind of give it that kind of water deposit I don't even know what the scientific terminology would be, but that kind of orangey sort of deposited look that exists on a stalactite when it's in a cave, that kind of sits in the recesses and kind of runs down in certain areas. I'm sure it has something to do with the minerals that exist, but that's what I'm going to do. I don't want it to look like wood, so I'm trying to make it not look like wood because it is a stone club that she is wielding here. There we go. Just let that sit for a second. Okay, now the leather brown is dry. I'm going to give it a wash with sepia shade, which is my favorite wash, again, to add some shadow to her garments. I'm going to use kind of my larger, older dry brush to do this just because it will cover more. But you can see immediately when I place that onto the miniature, all of a sudden it kind of comes to life and those folds start to come through. And it starts to look like old, aged leather. I do not want to get this on the skin if I can help it. As it will change the kind of the look and color of that skin. I want the skin to be kind of a cold blue kind of color. I don't want it to be brown like I just did there. So I'm going to get my number 2 that's clean, and I'm just going to wipe it off. You can use a finger. And then I'm just, like I said, going to all over wash with this sepia wash into all of the recesses on this leather. Kind of, they look like just like mismatched hide, animal hide. I don't know if I'm going to differentiate the different colors at this point. We're running out of time. So I think I'm just going to leave them all the same kind of color leather, I think. And then I'm probably just going to use a dry brush here, folks. I think that's the technique I'm going to use for the leather because it's got great folds in it, lots of texture, so it would be perfect for that. You can see already how that's looking. I'm just going to kind of let that go, let that dry. This isn't dry quite yet, so I'm going to leave the club for now, but I'm also going to give that a sepia wash as well. While that sepia wash is drying, I'm going to grab that same brush that I just used. It's a little wet. I'll grab the other dry brush I have here. And I'm going to grab Stonewall Gray to start. And I am going to take some of that, put it on my dry brush. And again, for dry brushing, folks, load your brush. You don't want to load it to the ferrule, just the top. And then you're just going to wipe most of it off till it almost is not depositing on the paper anymore. And then I'm basically just going to dry brush the fur. Start to do this, and it's going to just pick up the fur texture. You can already see how that's happening. And then I'm going to highlight it again with bone white. So you can see there how that has done that. I'm going to highlight it again with bone white, which I haven't used yet. Give it a good shake. And bone white's just going to be a little bit lighter, or quite a bit lighter actually, but there we go, like that. And I was going to add a sepia wash to this to kind of make it look like aged fur, but I don't know if I want to do that. I kind of like the way it looks like this. I don't think it needs it. Yeah, I don't think it needs it. I kind of like it. I think I'm going to leave it just like that. Looking good. Okay, so again, we're letting this wash dry a bit. To dry on the club now. Again, I'm going to use the sepia wash. On the club. Actually, you know what? The club, I think, is still a little wet, so it's starting to mix rather than act like a wash does. So we're just going to wait here. Maybe we'll use our fan, and we'll answer some more questions if there are some. And you can even see, too, on this leather brown area, I don't know if it's going to need a lot of highlights. I'm just going to do basic highlights on that. Maybe I'll add like a black wash to some of the areas to make that brown kind of a little darker. Okay, what did I say I was going to do? I was going to dry it. That's what I was going to do. I was going to grab my fan and dry it and look at questions. Lots of people watched tonight. Thanks, guys, for all the support. All the subs, people gifting subs, showing the love. Love it, guys. Love it, love it, love it. Good. Shadster. Kit Matari says, so to highlight, you were following the mini anatomy and reducing the area of these highlights as the brightness got higher. Yes, that is exactly it. And I wish I had said it that simply than the way that I explained it. Yes, that's exactly what happens. So it another question from Kit Matari. So it kind of looks like a topographic map as your highlight gets brighter and brighter. Exactly. It's exactly the approach. Weeping Jay says, imagine that tomorrow I receive the miniatures of my character created in... Oh, yeah, I think I already answered that question. I probably missed it the first time or whatever, and then... yeah, it's got a very blue marble feel, Caven Claw says. Yeah, so it definitely got a... I wanted to kind of make it look a bit more... Again, it's a lot more gray in my hand than it is on camera. But I kind of don't want to get that dark kind of blue kind of approach. Look, do you plan to use any of the Game Color effect paints? Yes, so I was going to use Rust today, Kyburn. And they are truly amazing. You are right. Question from Dungeon Tome. Just checked your homepage out and about your boxes. You write you get this themed papercraft terrain by Fat Dragon Games, but I didn't think he made any new papercraft anymore. I bought them all on DM's Guild, so is that just for you? Yeah, so it's just the regular stuff, the Fat Dragon papercraft that we use, the stuff that he's always had, but we just theme it to kind of have it, and we also print it for you. So you get papercraft in the box, you have to cut it out and put it, but it just takes away the effort that it takes to print it and so on. So, but right now, unfortunately, as everybody knows, we're not accepting subscriptions on our boxes because we're having a hard time getting product from our suppliers right now. So we are still shipping what we have to people who are subscribed, but we're not taking new subscriptions right now, unfortunately. We'll let you know when that changes. Oh Snap says, Jason, I know you usually use your Vallejo brushes for the tutorials, but do you have a daily driver brush that you use for the majority of your work? I use all Vallejo brushes, actually, even in my regular stuff. Sakura says, what would be a good mini for a beginner like me to start with? Something with a lot of surface area, like a hill giant is usually good, or something with a lot of texture that you can dry brush, because you'll get a really good effect from that as well. That worked really well. Oops, I always do that with my... looking good. All right. Okay. I think I'm getting through all the questions here. Dungeon Tome also says, just check your... Oh, I already got that question. Yes, sir. I'm just getting down to some of these questions down here. How often do you replace your brushes? I replace them. It's hard to say, but every few months I'll have to replace a brush, usually. Question, are we going to see the other giants? Warped Saint says, possibly. Maybe I'll grab some. Actually, maybe I'll have my son go grab some, and I can show you the difference between the blue and the stone giant blue. That might be good as well. Do we have any questions over on D&D? Is it possible to apply wash to black paint and have it visible? D&D Rage, not usually. Unless you do black and then do like a brown wash, sometimes you'll get it. If you want kind of like a dirty kind of effect in it, but not really. Not usually. Let's see here. I think that's it for questions right now. Oh, Shadsterf, question from above. I know due to time restraints you can't let it sit, but how long would you typically let it sit before moving on to another color or dry brush? Until it's dry. You definitely don't want to be like putting a wash over wet paint, for example, or highlighting over a wet wash. So until it's visibly dry, and you'll notice because it'll go matte. So you can see here that's all dry, but then in the recess there it's still a little bit wet. So I'm just going to wait a little bit longer here. I'm just going to mute myself so I can call my son. He's going to give me a hand here. I just called him. All right, looking good. I'm going to put that wash on that club now. Son, can you grab me all my giants from the case, please? Or any that are unpainted on top of the shelves. Thanks, son. That's Ethan, folks. He's such a great help. Helps me at a lot of shows. Some of you have met him, actually, at shows. And a gifted painter in his own right, actually. He is a commission painter. He's been doing some commissions lately, which is pretty crazy. He's very good. All right, so I'm taking that heavy brown. I'm adding this over, and I'm going to use a different color highlight so that it looks different than the leather, of course, is the plan anyways. We'll see how that goes. All right, there we go. Wash over that. We're actually making good time here. So I've got a number of different colors here. I've got leather brown again. I've also got plague brown, which I'm going to use plague brown for the stalactite. The stalactite. The fur is looking good the way that it is. I'm happy with the way the fur looks. Okay, that's not, yeah, I don't need that one. So this is the hill giant I did. Yeah, so that's the hill. Fire. Yeah, we can use the Fomorian and the, yeah, oh, there's also a cloud giant in there too. She's like holding up a thing. Yeah, all the giants. But you can see, folks, the difference between the blue in the frost giant and the blue in this. This is much more of a gray kind of granite look, and that is much more blue there. So that is the frost giant and the stone giant next to each other. This is the cloud giant and the frost giant. Frost Giant's one of my favorite minis I think I've done. We did a 3 or 4 part tutorial, 3-part tutorial, I think, on him. You can check that out on our channel. This is the Hill Giant I did a couple weeks ago. That was a dry brushed approach to the skin. You can see it gets a little kind of a muddled look. Not so, but he's got a lot of texture in his skin, which made sense. Frost Giant was done. And finally, I've got a Fomorian, which is technically a giant as well. But, with him, we added some like purple wash to the boils to make them look kind of like, ugh, gross there. But those are the giants. There you go. Asking you shall receive. Okay, so I am going to, what do I want to use for a highlight on that leather? I think I'm probably going to use, well, first I'm going to try, heavy brown is a little dark actually. That's not going to work. I'm going to use plague brown, and I'm going to go up to a mix of that and bone white. So plague brown is kind of more of a yellowy color That's going to look good on the leather. I just don't want it to look the same as the club. So I'm just going to dry brush this color onto his leather, and that's just going to highlight it real nicely. Yeah, it's working out. And in this case, I'm doing a bit more of an overbrush, so I'm not... an overbrush is just a more wet dry brush, or a wetter dry brush. If that makes sense. There you go. And it's just depositing a bit more paint. And you can do that on texture that is a lot more deep. The deeper the texture, the more you could potentially do like an overbrush to catch. But subtle texture, you'll just end up painting into the recesses. That looks cool. That worked out. Okay. I'm happy with that. And then I'm going to mix some bone white into this, and that'll be good. I do wish I did do a different color on this kind of center piece. It looks like there's a different piece there of, or a couple different kind of patchwork. Like if I had like a dark brown, like a heavy sienna to tan color, I would have done this like a dark hide. That would have been cool. I do not have those colors pulled, so we'll stick with what we have, but that would have been a good opportunity to mix that up a little bit so it's not just a lot of brown. But that's okay. So that is that, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of bone white to some plague brown. And then I'm going to add, that's going to be kind of like the final highlight in that area. How do you know what color to start with? That's a great question. That's from Haunted Ghost Killer, watching a ton of tutorials. I just watch tutorials, decide. I kind of start with a dark color usually, sometimes a mid color. Sometimes I start with a light color and then work my way up based on kind of the final. It just really comes with practice and watching tutorials and kind of by osmosis gaining the understanding of colors and how they work together and where I want to get to. So yeah, so that worked out. So basically what I'm doing is I mixed bone white with some some plague brown, and I'm just now hitting the highest details of what I want to highlight. I'm assuming like the edges here, which would be a little lighter, and across come some of the larger sections of and larger folds. I think that's all I'm going to do on the leather there. That turned out nicely. Again, I wish I had done two-tone, but I would have needed more colors for that, and that would have been a lot. All right. So that is all done. This is almost dry. As soon as we're done that, we're going to do that. And then basically for the base, don't think we're going to get to it today, but I'm going to use heavy blue gray, and then I'm just going to do a black wash and then highlight it with Stonewall Gray. And then there'll be a bit of a contrast between the Stone Giant and its base. While that is drying, though, I'm going to go ahead with my zero brush, and I am going to take some black, which is the only reason I have black, and I'm going to paint the eyes on this thing. They have jet black eyes. Again, I'm going to bring my brush to a point. I'm going to come in from the edge, which I usually do, and just paint black into this socket there where the eye is. There isn't much of an eyeball for them, so just want to make sure I get it like that. That's it. All right, and then, okay, so that is pretty much almost dry, that wash there. Very, very close to dry. And I'm going to go pretty heavy on the plague brown on that stalactite. Is there a reason you didn't do brush the hide before you added a wash? Would there be a discernible difference? Is there a reason why you didn't do a dry brush? I'm assuming the dry brush before the wash, because washes tend to darken everything. Sometimes if you're using lighter colors, so if I were to go from like a khaki to a bone white to like an off-white, then I might use a wash after that to kind of age it. But this case, I did it after, so it's more stark. Because if I were to add a wash after the highlight, it would just dull it all out. And also add that kind of mottled look that washes do. So this gave it a much more kind of stark and lively look to it. Now I'm going to take straight plague brown, and again a pretty heavy overbrush on this. I don't want to get brush strokes on it, so I don't want it to be too wet, but at the same time I want this to be quite different than the leather looks on there, and I want it to be kind of yellowy, and I'm going to bring it up with some Stonewall Gray as well, but I'm going pretty heavy on this because I want it to be quite a bit lighter, and kind of have that cave wall stalactite kind of look that you see in pictures and such. So there, I went pretty heavy with an overbrush on that. Looks good. Does not look like wood. And then we're going to do a couple more highlights, add some rust sort of effects. I might even stipple some like deposits, almost like a sodium kind of drying deposits on it as well, to make that look really cool there. I could go with a black wash in here and darken that, or even like with a brown wash of sorts, umber wash into here to make that a darker kind of color too. Or even an ink. Actually, an ink would do it very well. We're going to do that. Actually, I'm just going to call to my son. 1 second. Okay. Like that. Let that dry. Can you grab me some brown ink? Please, thank you. Just looking at questions. Do you recommend a wet palette? Yes, I do. If you want to try it. Again, the Vallejo paints stay wet in the palette long enough for me to usually do the minis that I want to do. But I've always wanted to try a wet palette myself, actually. And I'm excited to kind of give that a go. I'm going to go Stonewall Gray after the plague brown on this stalactite. And I'm going to just wipe it off. This is going to be more of a dry brush and not an overbrush. But this will lighten up this quite significantly. It's going to hit the highest detail. Just want to get the edge of it on the handle. Like that. And you can see that that is already changing kind of the color of it. And then finally some bone white, which I don't have any wet in my palette right now, but bone white will be the final kind of highlight on this. And I'm just going to focus on the top. Inks are on the right side, son, under where the heavy, extra opaque paints are. You can't find, what washes are there, son? Inks. Yeah. No, there should be a brown one. Like that. Brown, is that the brown ink? Thank you. Inks are a great way to change the surface color of a miniature. You place it on, and rather than a wash that kind of seeps into the recesses, inks will actually affect this surface tone. So an example of this is if I want to make this more brown, all I do is brush that over like this, and look at that. It will change the color. Basically, it's a great way, like I did after the fact, to add some differentiation in your colors. I'm using it full strength here because I want it to be a darker brown, but you can dilute it to change kind of the opacity of it, consistency, like that. I'm actually digging that. Thank you, son. Like that. that worked out. Glad I thought of that. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. And then it also comes down here as well, I think, this one. So I'm just going to do that. Careful not to get it on the skin. Just paint that on there. Like that. There we go. Then you have two-tone leather. And this is a great way to do this after the fact. If you do a whole area a certain color, want to change it up after the fact, that's a good way to do it. I could even do, if I wanted to, I could do this whole upper area, this darker color, which would actually look really cool if I wanted to. I may actually do that. Why not? We have 10 minutes left, and I don't have much more to do, so I'm going to go ahead and go all the way here. Just really darken this other part as if it's all been stitched together from different types of hides. You could even use like 3 different I could have used like 3 different tones here, but this worked out really nicely. And the Vallejo inks are just so good. They go on nice and smooth. Like that. There. Like I said, inks are different than washes. Washes are intended to kind of add shadow. Inks are used to change the tone or the color of an area. They're much less opaque than a wash is. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so that worked. Stalactite is done, except for what I wanted to do, which was to use rust. So basically, this is totally experimental. Never done this before, but I am going to basically take rust into a dry brush like this, wipe it off a little bit, and I'm just going to stipple it onto areas of this stalactite, and it should look kind of like they do sometimes when they have deposits in them. Kind of those mineral deposits. Like that. Yeah, works. Not too much, I just want a little bit. But almost like it was hanging for a while and all of this stuff kind of built on it over time. That worked out nice, that's very cool. I like that. And then I also wanted to take some bone white here and then just kind of like stipple on some kind of mineral deposits. So like, you know how they have kind of the wet white sort of light area here. Just kind of like, almost like it's dripping down. In some areas there. Very cool. By stipple, all I'm doing is I'm kind of dotting or tapping with the tip of my brush. There it is. And you can see the difference in the tones of the leather. And then, like I said, all you do is heavy blue gray on the base, a little bit of black wash, then attach the base, mini base to it like this, and you've got yourself a stone giant in 2 hours, less than 2 hours because we had announcements. There we go. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Again, the VOD will be on YouTube, both on the D&D YouTube and on the RealmSmith YouTube. We love everything we do here. We thank you so much for being a part of it. Thank you for making us your preferred entertainment for the apocalypse as usual. Paint all the minis you can. Post them in our Discord. Join our Discord and post them there. And I'd love to give you, if you want any tips or thoughts or questions, just make sure that you tag myself, RealmSmith, you'll see it. You'll see where I appear in our Discord to make sure that you get what you need from me, because there's a lot going on there, so it's kind of hard sometimes to see it. So just make sure that you tag me. And make sure if you put them on Instagram or Facebook that you tag us there as well. I love to see your creations. I look at them all the time and am so inspired by all of the hard work and miniatures that I see constantly kind of going up. We will see you tomorrow night for Tides of Wildemount, episode 5. Can't believe we're almost halfway through a season. Very excited. Tomorrow night is, we're leading to the pinnacle of the kind of first adventure arc of this campaign. So I'm very excited. It's going to be nuts tomorrow night. So definitely try and tune in there. There's something crazy under this blanket here that you'll see tomorrow. And then also behind the screen, 8 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, and then Players Table Thursday. And then we're back again for Nolzur's the next Sunday. So thanks, guys. Have a wonderful night. Be good to each other. If you liked what you saw here, please follow and subscribe. And we will see you tomorrow night for Tides of Wildemount. Goodbye.